Hello, I'm coming to you once again from my office in the Rayburn House office building in Washington, D.C. A few hours ago when I flew back from Knoxville, as I was driving away from Reagan National Airport, I heard a report on WMAL radio, the biggest radio station in this city, that said that an organization affiliated with the Bernie Sanders campaign had sent out a tweet of congratulations to all those who participated in shutting down the Donald Trump rally in Chicago this past Friday night. They said it was an effort that involved several thousand people and I think about a dozen different organizations, and they called it a great victory. I don't think it should have been classified as a victory by anyone. In fact, it was a defeat for something that this country has always held dear, and that is freedom of speech. And I was really horrified by what went on, but not particularly surprised. I, of course, have noticed that no conservatives or anybody on the right has gone to protest speeches by Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders in such a way that would force cancellation of their rallies. I have not endorsed Donald Trump or anyone else for president. I've felt all along that Republicans are independent minded people, and they pretty much make up their own minds in presidential races. And also I've said all along that there's things that I liked and things that maybe I wasn't as enthusiastic about on all the Republican candidates. There is no such thing as a perfect candidate. There never has been and never will be. President Reagan used to say if you found somebody in politics that you agree with 80% of the time, that's about as good as it can get. But there certainly has been a lot of intolerance from those on the left side of the political spectrum over the years. In fact, in my last newsletter, I have a section entitled Liberal Intolerance. Edward Luce, and I'll read that at this time. Edward Luce, the top U.S. correspondent for the Financial Times of Great Britain, wrote a column entitled The Rise of Liberal Intolerance in America. He wrote, "Yet the revival of political correctness on U.S. campuses and the increasingly shrill tone of much of the intellectual left tells another story. Instead of championing free speech, the left is trying to shut it down. In the name of diversity, it demands conformity. At stake is the character of U.S. democracy. Far from outgrowing race, the PC movement is entrenching it." And that was the quote from Edward Luce, this correspondent for the Financial Times of Great Britain. And I wrote in this section, unfortunately, a poll by CNN and the Kaiser Foundation published on November 25th said 67% of whites and 65% of blacks said racial tensions have increased in America over the last 10 years. This same poll found that only 29% said racial tensions had increased over the preceding 10 years in 2001. Too many on the left loudly proclaim their tolerance and then seem to tolerate anything but traditional Christianity. Liberals are certainly intolerant toward anyone who advocates conservative positions on national issues. I had a personal experience when I was a senior at the University of Tennessee. I returned in late September. The university started in late September in those years. We were on the quarter system. I had written a column for the UT Daily Beacon. I was the token conservative columnist for the UT Daily Beacon. The campuses were very radical back then. And somebody sent me anonymously, I still don't know to this day who sent it to me, the minutes of a committee called the Issues Committee, which had control of student activity money, and it was quite a bit of money, and they paid whopping fees in the many thousands of dollars to well-known speakers to come into the campus. Well, they had sent out invitations to all kinds of liberal and left-wing speakers, and in fact the most conservative speaker that they had invited was Senator Hubert Humphrey, who was a very liberal senator who was, of course, the nominee for president in 1968. They had a note that said possible conservative speakers, and they put Kaz Walker, who was a local grocer, and John Birch Society member, and then it said Ku Klux Klan member. That apparently was their idea of a conservative. And I wrote a column blasting that and named 15 leading conservatives, William Buckley, Jack Kemp, many others, who would have been very respectable to come to the campus. Tom Gillum, then editor of the Daily Beacon, refused to run that column. It was pure liberal censorship. So I went down to the Knoxville Journal, which was our morning daily newspaper at that time, and talked to the editor, Guy Smith, about that. And he said, well, it sounds like something for the newspaper, for the university community, but he would take a look at it. So I took it back up there later that day. Much to my surprise, the next morning, which was a football Saturday, and the journal circulation went up by an extra 5,000 on football Saturdays. He ran that article on the front page of the Knoxville Journal. It made Tom Gillum so mad, he said that he was going to remove me as news editor, cut my column down to once every 2 weeks, and take me off of the SGA beat, the student government beat, which was considered the best beat on the paper. I told him, no, you're not, because I quit. Of course, I was working for free anyway. I went down and told the Knoxville Journal editor what they had done, and he gave me a full-time job as assistant state editor of the Knoxville Journal. The Journal in those days gave you pretty good titles instead of giving you very large money. But I did get a full-time job out of that liberal intolerance and censorship that I experienced back in those years. But I think the people that protested so violently and angrily on Donald Trump's rally should have been ashamed of themselves, but I'm sure they were very proud of themselves. We've seen so much of that over the years where universities won't invite conservative speakers to speak at commencement ceremonies, and also we've seen it in the fact that many conservative students in universities and colleges around the country don't feel free to express their true opinions for fear that they'll be given lower grades. I think it's a real shame, and I think it's unfortunate that some in the national media are criticizing Mr. Trump when they should be criticizing those people who are trying to do what they can to stop freedom of speech in this country. Thank you.